headlines. North Korea holds a rare open meeting at the UN headquarters and says it's on the right path in terms of its human rights record, although there might have been occasional hiccups. The Korean government decides to inject additional 5 trillion won into the Korean economy, grappling with the still dull domestic demand and the weak yen hurting its exporters. And a 6.6 magnitude earthquake hits southwest China's Yunnan province, killing at least 1 person and injuring dozens of others. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the program. Coming to you live from Seoul, I am Kang Chery. The United Nations rebuke of North Korea's human rights violations has prompted the international community to act, realizing that it can no longer turn a blind eye to this growing criticism. The North Korean mission at the UN held a very rare session on this very matter. Choi Yoo-sun has our top story.
North Korea has publicly admitted the existence of its labor camps for the first time as the international community increases pressure on the North to stop abusing the human rights of its people. At a rare session on the issue Tuesday, the North Korean delegation at the UN said the so-called reform through labor detention camps helps people adjust through their mentality and reflect on their wrongdoings. The North Koreans, however, deny that they run political prison camps. Pyongyang also said it is open to discussing its human rights record so long as there's sincerity behind the talks. It revealed a North Korean official recently met with a European Union human rights official and that the two sides will meet soon. As the UN plans to adopt a resolution next month condemning human rights abuses in the North, Pyongyang accused Washington of trying to topple the North Korean leadership.
And DPRK is totally against misusing human rights for regime change in the country. And in particular, as I said, for United States, who is not recognizing DPRK as a sovereign state.
The North's UN delegation denounced the international community's push for a resolution, saying it would cause a further strain on inter-Korean relations.
And we do oppose these resolutions. This resolution means confrontation, and confrontation is not compatible with the dialogue and cooperation that we are very much in favor of.
Defending itself, North Korea shoveled the blame towards South Korean military exercises and international economic sanctions, which it says are acting as obstacles to improving human rights in the North. Choi Yoo-sun, ARIRANG News.
A former U.S. defense chief says the U.S. and South Korea would consider using nuclear weapons should Pyongyang attack Seoul. He also admits that Washington does not know much about the inner workings of the North Korean regime. Kim Hyun-bin has the details.
In his recently published memoir entitled Worthy Fights, former U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta speaks about the threat of war on the Korean peninsula. Should worst come to worst, Panetta says the option of using nuclear weapons on North Korea was available to Washington, Seoul, and U.S. Forces Korea. In terms of a missile attack on the U.S. mainland, Panetta said North Korea is considered the biggest threat, bigger than China or even Russia. He described the regime as the most troublesome in the world, and that the U.S. government spends a considerable amount of time and money trying to predict what they would do next. He also acknowledged that despite those efforts, U.S. intelligence on the inner workings of the regime is weak and barely scratches the surface. For example, Panetta points out that Washington was in the dark on North Korea's succession plans in 2009 and was surprised when Kim Jong-un emerged the strongest contender to assume power from his father, Kim Jong-il. Overall, Panetta says U.S. intelligence on the inner workings of the regime has been lacking for years. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
A former chief of U.S. Forces Korea says Washington should not publicly press Seoul to accept the deployment of the so-called THAAD missile defense system of the United States. At a forum in Washington Tuesday, Burwell Bell, who served as a USFK commander from 2006 to 2008, said although he agrees with Washington's plan, it would be simply irresponsible for the current administration to press South Korea either diplomatically or publicly. He stressed that the issue should be settled with the South Korean government first before being made public. His comments come after a U.S. military official openly said discussions were being held on a possible THAAD deployment, this while Seoul was still denying that possibility. With President Park Geun-hye pushing through with her vision of reunite the two Koreas, the South Korean government is carefully getting a head start. Seoul's financial regulator says the amount of funds needed to bridge the economic gap between Seoul and Pyongyang is likely to reach $500 billion. Kim Young-gil has the details.
The South Korean government, in a plan that will be formally announced later this month, will seek financial assistance from the OECD, look to maximize the use of North Korean resources, and foster the private investment of South Korean firms in North Korea. This in attempts to ease the burden on North Korea's economy in preparation for a unification of the two Koreas. The South Financial Services Commission says the only feasible way to minimize unification costs is to develop North Korea's economy. North Korea's per capita gross national income is presumed to be around $1,200, 18 times smaller than South Korea's. Raising the North's figure to $10,000 within 20 years would come at an estimated expense of $500 billion. It's money that would go toward rebuilding North Korea's social infrastructure and developing industrial complexes. The South Korean government is considering ways to restructure Pyongyang's exchange rate system, reorganize its financial infrastructure, and set up new policies in the banking sector. The financial regulator says unification with North Korea would open up new opportunities for South Korea, as it will create larger market demand and alleviate the geopolitical risk factors on the Korean peninsula. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
President Park Geun-hye will attend the 10th summit of the Asia-Europe meeting, better known as ASEM, in Milan, Italy, next week. In line with the summit's theme of responsible partnership for sustainable growth and security, President Park will talk about her vision of connectivity between Asia and Europe. The president will also travel to Rome next Friday to seek stronger cooperation in her envisioned creative economy, trade, and energy plans. Ahead of the official visit to Rome, she will pay a courtesy call to Pope Francis at the Vatican.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chery for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to salvage the recovery momentum for the Korean economy. The government says it's injecting additional stimulus measures to help Korea's smaller firms. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The Korean government will pump an additional $4.7 billion on top of the $24 billion worth of policy funds it plans to spend this year to boost economic growth. Under the plan, around $3.3 billion will be spent on the provision of financial loans to encourage small and mid-sized companies to import more. $650 million will be spent solely on boosting facilities investment. The remainder, $370 million, will be used to support the Export-Import Bank of Korea to promote the country's exports. A separate amount of more than $930 million will go toward increasing financial support to Korean exporters to Japan, particularly small and mid-sized companies, to help them ride the wave of the weakening Japanese currency. The government says it will also increase the number of duty-free shops to meet rising demand from Chinese tourists visiting Korea. If the plan succeeds, the government says it expects the economy to grow by a maximum of an extra 0.2 percentage point in the fourth quarter and reach its yearly target of 3.7%. An analyst from Kyobo Securities Company sees the government's plan as a positive step towards steering the economy in the right direction.
The effectiveness of the measures can be gauged by how business entities react. Will they expand their investments despite the external risks? Samsung Electronics' decision earlier this week to build a semiconductor plant in Pyeongtaek could be seen as a positive.
The additional measures come amid mixed signals about how stable Korea's economic recovery actually is. Business sentiment among Korean companies edged up in September from the previous month, but the latest industrial output dropped by 0.6% in August from the previous month. Kim Jeon, ARIRANG News.
Citing many factors, including an economic slowdown in Europe, the International Monetary Fund has lowered its outlook for the global economic growth, but it has kept this year's outlook for Korea at 3.7%. Kim Min-ji has this next report.
The International Monetary Fund has slightly lowered its outlook for the global economy for this year and the next, but has maintained Korea's growth forecast for this year. The IMF says it expects Asia's fourth largest economy to expand 3.7% in 2014 on the back of increased exports and investments. The figure is unchanged from its previous forecast in April and is in line with the Korean government's projection. The fund raised its growth outlook by 0.2 percentage points to 4% for 2015. For the global economy, the IMF downwardly revised its growth forecast to 3.3% for this year, reflecting the slowdown in the Eurozone and a less optimistic outlook for several emerging economies. This is 0.1 percentage points down from its earlier forecast in July. However, the IMF does expect the global economy to pick up steam next year despite a lowered projection. It left the growth projection unchanged for advanced economies for this year, but downgraded the forecast slightly for 2015. The fund lowered the forecast for emerging economies for both this year and the next. The IMF said that while the world economy is showing signs of recovery, growth may fall short of expectations due to increased downside risks such as geopolitical tensions and possibilities of an extended period of low inflation. The fund also stressed the need for cash-rich nations such as Germany to make large public investments in order to keep the global economy on a recovery track, while noting that a number of major economies are falling behind. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Korea's retail and tourism industries are all smiles after a record number of Chinese tourists came to the country for their Chinese National Day holiday, which just came to an end on this Tuesday. But will the good times keep on coming? Connie Kim reports.
A record 160,000 Chinese tourists are estimated to have flooded into Korea during their national holiday, but many of them have expressed frustration about their experiences here. Reflecting their dissatisfaction, less than 30% of Chinese tourists have made a second visit to Korea in the past 3 years. Identifying the problems is a first step. For one, Chinese tourists spend more than half of their money on shopping during their stay in Korea, which experts say poses issues over the long term.
The product brands these tourists buy are mostly global ones that can be bought in other countries as well. If Korea starts losing price competitiveness, it won't be as appealing for the Chinese to visit Korea.
Peck says demand among Chinese travelers for leisure activities will rise as their income levels do. For that reason, it's recommended that Korea begin investing more time and energy into culture, leisure, and entertainment travel packages that are unique to Korea.
I wish there were more chances to experience Korean culture, such as trying on the traditional costume hanbok and more tours outside of Seoul. I personally want to go down to Chuncheon to taste their trademark chicken dish, 닭갈비.
I want to visit Busan and also try making chicken ginseng soup and kimchi while I'm here.
The availability of affordable accommodations is another hurdle for Korea's tourism market. There are some 190 tourist hotels currently in Seoul, but less than 1/5 are 2- to 3-star hotels. Now that keeps many Chinese tourists from booking return flights to Korea, and government regulations are holding back new construction projects.
Hotels are currently banned from being within 200 meters of a school. But because of the growing demand for accommodations, this regulation is expected to be eased in the long term.
The shopping may be luring Chinese tourists here now, but Korea will need to show it has more to offer to keep the millions of Chinese visitors coming year after year. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
A large number of Korean smartphone users are turning their backs on the country's #1 messaging application and taking their business elsewhere. German-based Telegram messenger says 1.5 million Koreans have subscribed to their service over the past week. This exodus began after local prosecutors here said they will begin investigating false rumors that are circulating online, which prompted fears that the Korean government could be reading users' messages, or could read users' messages, that is. Telegram, which said it would launch a Korean version of its service soon, is popular across the world because it's heavily encrypted. KakaoTalk said Wednesday that it plans to adopt a privacy mode that would have similar features. 2 Americans and a German have won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry this year for their achievements in realizing super-resolved fluorescence microscopy. Sweden's Nobel Prize Foundation announced just about an hour ago that the prize and $1.1 million of prize money will jointly be awarded to Eric Betzig of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and Stanford University Stefan Hell and William Moerner, a director at the Max Planck University in Germany. The Nobel Committee explained their groundbreaking work has helped bypass the limit of maximum resolution in traditional optical microscopy. If you're an avid fan of Korea's ancient palaces, you will know that part of Toksugung Palace in Seoul had been off limits for the past few years. This building is called Seokjojeon, and visitors will now be able to take a tour of this building starting next week. Here is our Park Ji-won with more.
Completed in 1910, Seokjojeon is a Western-style stone building, part of Toksugung Palace in central Seoul. Designed by British architect G.R. Harding, the 3-story hall was built according to the 18th century European court style, and it housed King Gojong's sleeping quarters and audience rooms. The building went through so many alterations during more than 35 years of Japanese occupation in the early 20th century and following the Korean War. And Seokjojeon now opens to the public after 5 years of restoration work, which cost some $13 million.
We have put items that have been stored at the National Palace Museum of Korea, but in their original position, after thoroughly studying old pictures and doing our own research.
Seokjojeon will open to the public from next Monday. Visitors can see over 130 displayed items inside the building, including about 40 pieces of original furniture set up at the time of the building's establishment. Visitors can also watch documentaries about Korea's modern history and King Gojong and his royal families. King Gojong was the final king of Joseon dynasty that lasted some 600 years and the first emperor of the short-lived Great Korean Empire, which was forcefully annexed by Japan.
Historians have shown us that Seokjojeon is not a symbol of foreign annexation, but a symbol of King Gojong's willingness for independent modernization. So this hall is of great historic importance to Korea.
Seokjojeon, a grand building that has bore witness to some of the most vivid parts of Korea's modern history, is finally back with the Korean people some 104 years after its establishment. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
A massive 6.6 magnitude earthquake rocked China's Yunnan province last night, with rescue operations underway, of course, to search for survivors. And for more, Paul is joining us from the news center. Paul, this is the second powerful earthquake to strike this region in less than 2 months. How is the government coping with this natural disaster?
Well, Beijing has deployed thousands of troops to assist relief efforts in the southwestern province. China's state media says more than 124,000 people have been forced to flee their homes in the wake of the widespread destruction and possible aftershocks. This as local authorities confirmed on Monday that at least one person has died, while injuries are numbering in the hundreds. Our Kwon So-ah reports.
Buildings shook, electricity and telephone services went out, roofs crumbled, and people ran out of their homes when a powerful earthquake that the China Earthquake Network Center has measured at 6.6 in magnitude rattled Jinggu County in China's southwestern Yunnan province late Tuesday night. Officially, at least one person has been killed and more than 320 injured. Some local media reports say 5 people have lost their lives. The epicenter was located 85 kilometers from Pu'er City, an underdeveloped yet densely populated area made up of various ethnic minorities. The tremors were also felt in Yunnan province's capital of Kunming and other neighboring cities. Chinese geological officials say the quake was just 5 kilometers deep, another factor that could worsen damage. Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang has ordered immediate rescue operations. Around 1,000 emergency officials are on site to attend to those in need. Some have said that the damage is not as bad as the magnitude 6.3 quake that struck the same region 2 months ago, killing more than 600 people. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
And staying in Asia, pro-democracy activists have struck a deal with Hong Kong officials to hold formal talks this Friday. These protests have now dwindled to just a few hundred people in just the last couple of days, so it looks like they're in a much weaker position going into this meeting.
That's right. The sitting group, which is mostly made up of students at this point, is hoping to use what momentum they have left to push for change. But demonstrators have expressed concern over the limited scope of the proposed dialogue, as it will fall within the framework of Hong Kong's constitution. Local authorities say the universal suffrage that students are demanding in the 2017 chief executive election runs squarely against those rules. Student leaders have called on protesters to continue their demonstrations until a breakthrough is made.
If Ms. Carrie Lam or the other Hong Kong officials still insist that they will not respond or they will not try to solve the political problem, we may consider to end the political dialogue.
The prolonged movement, meanwhile, has been hitting the local economy, raising a backlash from local businesses. The Hong Kong Retail Management Association says companies in Hong Kong saw their sales dip as much as 80% during the otherwise commercially lucrative Golden Week holiday.
And shifting now to the tech industry, Paul, the social networking service Twitter is suing the U.S. government as it's continuing its fight against federal authorities to protect user data. On what grounds is it seeking this legal action? I mean, online privacy is, of course, a major issue these days, but do they have a case?
Well, Twitter is claiming that its free speech rights are being violated. More specifically, the restrictions on how much information it can disclose regarding government surveillance of its some 270 million users. The social media firm filed a lawsuit on Tuesday in California, arguing that current rules prevent it from even stating that it has not received any national security requests. They're also urging the FBI and Department of Justice to release more information about the secret orders. The Justice Department responded to the lawsuit, saying it addressed similar concerns from others in the IT industry. 5 major technology companies, including Google and Microsoft, reached a settlement with the government earlier this year on the surveillance issue. But Twitter rejected the deal, saying it should not be bound by any disclosure limits at home or abroad.
And finally, the Japanese yen has been in a free fall against the U.S. dollar, hitting its lowest level in more than 6 years. There's been a lot of volatility over the FX counter, of course, and now with business groups and policymakers in Tokyo at odds over this record low.
Well, it's definitely drawn mixed reactions, and it's also important to note that the softer yen is hitting consumers hard as they continue to grapple with a recent sales tax hike. Some Japanese business lobby groups are unhappy with the yen's current levels because it's boosting import costs, which they say is hurting smaller companies. On the other side, Japan's central bank says a weak yen is a positive sign for the economy, as it will boost exports and revenue for companies that operate globally. Analysts, meanwhile, remain on the fence on the currency's long-term trend.
We continue to be bearish on the Japanese yen, mainly against the US dollar, but against some other currencies as well. The reason is that the monetary policy divergence over the long term should result in wider interest rate spread between US and Japan.
Excessive currency weakness is harmful for any economy, but if market expectations follow through, Japanese businesses and consumers should brace themselves for even higher energy costs and food prices. Chery?
Thank you so much, Paul, for those stories. And we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. And that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching.